I'm Dave Pike, born and raised right here in Huntington, West Virginia. Lived in the South after I left Marshall, after I graduated. I lived in the South in North Carolina for 25 years and recently came back home for a job.
And you are my?
I'm your stepfather.
What is your definition of success?
You know, Rachel, that seems to be actually something that people have searched for forever. Let me paraphrase it by telling you a story. A young man searched for success in ancient times forever. He walked and scoured all of Asia. Finally, he was sent to a high mountain where a wise old man lived, and the wise old man supposedly could tell him what success was. He climbed up the mountain. He was bloody from all the briar bushes and everything, and he asked the old man, he said, "Old man, how do I find success?" The old man said, "Follow me." Took him all the way back down to the mountain. At the foot of the mountain there was a big lake. He said, "Come with me." They waded into the water. The old man, once they got waist deep, seized the young man and forced him under the water. The young man was startled and surprised, and the old man held his grip. He was very strong. The young man finally knew he was going to drown, and about that time the old man lifted him up. The young man looked at the old man and said, "You're crazy. I came to you to find out what success was." Said, "And you tried to drown me." And the old man looked at him and said, "Tell me, when you went under the water, what was the one thing you desired most?" The young man said, "Air, to breathe." The old man said, "When you desire success that badly, then you shall have it." So success is defined by many things, money, and of course my definition would be raising my family successfully.
Where is your background? Where were you born and raised?
Born and raised right here well, actually Chesapeake, right across the bridge. Went to Marshall. Spent a lot of time in Huntington. It took me 9 years to get my 4-year degree, but that's because I majored in party the first couple of years in football. Then moved to North Carolina after I got out of school.
How did your upbringing play a role in your success?
My upbringing was very difficult. We were very, very poor, extremely poor. What psychologists would term today as very dysfunctional. My parents had no more business together than oil and vinegar. Fought all the time. I can remember cutting mold off bread to eat it. I mean, we were that poor, not having heat. Very dysfunctional upbringing, but it motivated me to try to have more.
Who or what inspired you?
Oh, I've sought out so many people to inspire me. I mean, I've sought out mentors. There's an old man by the name of Earl Oliver who lives down south who was an inspiration to me. He only had a 10th grade education, and he was very wise. And he's in his 70s now at this time, but he rose through hard work and intelligence, he rose to amass a fortune of about $5 million. But not only that, he's raised his family successfully. I don't mean to indicate to you that money is the definition of success. It most certainly is not. But he rose to amass the wealth, raise a good family, and he probably, Mr. Earl is probably the biggest inspiration.
Growing up, who did you view as successful?
Growing up, I viewed people with money as successful because they could eat and dress nice. And once I got a little bit older, as a police officer, I'll give you for example, as a police officer in North Carolina, I happened to pull over 2 of North Carolina's top 10 most wealthy men. One of them I pulled over. He was a dapperly dressed old man. And when I pulled him over, he was in a nice new Cadillac. He was speeding. And when I looked at his license, I immediately knew who he was. It said Albert Coley Monk his license. Probably in his 70s. And so that means his name was, his company's name was AC Monk. Big tobacco name. He was probably worth, I would say, around $30 million. So I got Mr. Monk and put him in my police car. I said, Mr. Monk, you know, you were speeding. And he said, I wasn't out to ruin anybody's day. So I let him go. The second man I pulled over was one of North Carolina's top 10 wealthiest men. I didn't have any idea who he was. He was in an old Lincoln. I mean, about 1979. This was about 1992. He's in a 1979 old Lincoln, had well over 100,000 miles, and I pulled him over, and he waved at me. I had the lights on him and the blue lights and stuff. He waved at me, and I thought, who in the world is this? And he turned the corner and drove into his driveway. Well, I shut the lights off and pulled in. It was Mr. Robert Hill. Mr. Robert Hill owned all kinds of nursing homes and stuff, and he was dressed in no more than like I am, just jeans and an old shirt, and you know, and he talked to me just about life. Never had a college education. Daddy died when he was 15, and so he had to take his daddy's farm and supervise older men and make it, you know. And later on, Mr. Hill would come, and he'd see me sitting there running radar somewhere. He'd stop and just talk to me for hours. So I deemed him a great deal more successful than Mr. Monk, who wouldn't have had the time of day for me, except that I was pulling him over. But Mr. Hill, he didn't care how he was dressed. He wasn't trying to make a statement by what he looked like. He wasn't trying to make a statement by his name. He was just who he was, although he had plenty of money. He was just who he was. To the common man and to the wealthy man, he maintained his personal integrity. So for me, I would say that he helped me define the difference between having money and being successful, and just truly being a person and being successful, if that makes any sense.
Do you see yourself as a successful person?
In certain areas. You know, I moved down south. I went into the Marine Corps and went down south, and I was able to get into a community, an old southern community that was still fighting the Civil War, that you know, deemed me as a Yankee. And eventually that community came to accept me. They actually came to accept me more than my wife, who was from that community. When I left there, she finally left me after 18 and a half years for another man. But when I left there were several community members, leaders, that came up to me at various times and said, Dave, we saw what you did. We know that you worked hard and you did everything you could. So when I left there, I left my daughter, who was then in her 20s, I left her with a good name. That to me was success.
What kind of struggles or obstacles did you have to overcome?
Well, when you grow up in a shame-based or dysfunctional family life, as I did, you get these ideas in your mind that maybe, I'll give you for example. My mother was she knew that we as kids wanted more. And we'd drive by just regular folks, drive by their house, and she'd say, look at that, they got that big nice house, see what money does for you, you know, they're so arrogant and stuff like that. It was really mentally, I kept those thoughts with me for a long time. So overcoming those thoughts that, you know, those people were just trying to make a living. It was a psychological nightmare. I had to read and study for years to overcome that, and realize that, hey, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be just a regular person, and that was a struggle.
What lessons has your work life taught you?
Well, you know, I spent about 20 years in law enforcement. And when I first got in law enforcement, I was the hard ass, quintessential hard ass, I suppose. I fought, chased people down, you know. I guess maybe the badge gave me a legal right to be nosy, and I was constantly in the mix of things. But as I got older, after a few years, you get tired of that. At least I hope most officers do. And you start realizing that it's more about relationships and helping people. I remember one time I was working part-time at the hospital in the emergency room, big hospital in Greenville, North Carolina. And this guy tapped me on the shoulder, and he was huge. I mean, he's about 6'5", 340 pounds. He was big, and I looked up at him. And he said, "Sergeant Pike, I heard you were a nice guy. I got to ask you a question." I said, "Okay." So I walked him outside where we could have some privacy. He said, "I'm on crack and I need to get off." And I said, "Okay, buddy." I said, and I told him where the place was he could go to get help and so on and so forth. And he did. He went and got help, because 30 days later he came back and tapped me on the shoulder again. He said, "Sergeant Pike, thank you so much." He said, "It really helped me." He said, I'm now off crack. And I began to understand that helping people and serving people is something I learned that is much more gratifying than any fight I ever got into or any arrest I ever made. I remember that more than the domestic abuses I broke up or anything else. That was gratifying to me.
How has your life been different than what you imagined?
Well, I had grandiose ideas of being. I wanted to go into the military. I wanted to go to the Marine Corps. I wanted to be an officer in Force Recon, which is the Special Forces of the Marine Corps. Now I'm talking, this is a young man's mindset. And then I wanted to come out and be a state trooper. All the things that I saw as manly or macho or whatever, that's what I was into as a young man. And as I got older, again, going back to helping people, I started this in my 30s. Of course, I was studying to try to help me get over my own belief system from my upbringing. I wanted a different belief system. And as I grew in my readings and in my studying and so on and so forth, I felt that this macho mindset, because I played college ball, I was a police officer, I was a Marine, all this other stuff, really means nothing compared to watching others that you've helped. And that's how my life has gone differently. I've had some top management positions in companies and stuff now since law enforcement, and some of them just don't treat people right. And I found that I can't live with that. I can't live with myself by treating people as they would have me treat them. So I've become more of a spokesman, someone that has the courage to stand up and help the man that you're working with, as opposed to furthering the management elite's philosophy. And I'm not categorizing all management personnel this way. I'm just saying some of the companies I work for. So.
Do you have any regrets? Would you do anything differently?
Yes, I would. When I went to college, I went in with the sole purpose of playing football and partying. So, and yes, we old people partied back then. And I wish that I wish that I'd studied harder, put more emphasis on my studies, and gained a greater technical knowledge of the sciences and English. There's a very famous attorney, and I can't think of that attorney's name.